Good morning. My name is Ann Scarborough, and as a member of the board, I welcome you all. As we begin, please turn off any of your electronic devices. I invite you to enjoy the chapel in the back of the sanctuary and note any joys and concerns that you have in the book there. If you have little ones, we have a nursery downstairs. We also broadcast this service on the closed-circuit TV, which is located in the social hall near the nursery if you need to stay downstairs. After the service, we're going to have a congregational picture outside the front of the church. So at the end of the service, everybody please gather outside before going down to the social hall. And at that time, we invite you downstairs to enjoy hospitality and the opportunity to greet one another. Finally, please note any announcements in your order of service with the many ways to be engaged in this vibrant community. Come, come. Whoever you are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, you are welcome here. No matter whom you love, how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. You are welcome here whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears. You are welcome here. If you come here with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands, you are welcome here.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Folks who were here last week decided to come back. That's great. I'll take that as an affirmation. Good morning and welcome to this community where we say we need not believe alike to love alike. Yom Kippur begins on Tuesday evening, and in Judaism, Yom Kippur is the day of atonement and confession. It's a profoundly important day in that faith, and the practice of it goes to the very core of what it means to be Jewish. We Unitarian Universalists, we're not so great at confession. We rarely make it a part of our worship, and to be brutally honest, we use, I'll speak for myself, can be a little smug. But I like to think that we are pretty good as a group, and we could use a little work. And confession is helpful, and confession is a practice that is counterintuitive. We think it will make us feel bad, but really I think it does make us feel good to be taking an honest look at ourselves. I'd like to read these words by Howard Thurman. And before I do, by the way, there is God language in this reading, and I'm sure that you can translate that God language into ideas and ideas that are most meaningful for you. So we Unitarian Universalists, we translate all the time, and I think we're the better for it, right? So the words of Howard Thurman: it is good to confess in the quietness of whatever there is within us that cries out for confession, and to feel in the act of confession that God, who hears and judges, also understands and loves. It is no ordinary thing to be free enough within to confess, even to God, that which cries out for confession. It is wonderful beyond measure to be able to share the stirrings of thanksgiving which we feel when we do this. To be able to say thanks to God with no necessity to try to impress God with our thoughtfulness or store up some form of merit that will plead our case at other times when gratitude is lacking and thanksgiving is far removed. It is no ordinary thing to simply say, thank you so much, God. Thank you so very much. That's the end of the quote. My sermon today is a confession of sorts, and also an expression of gratitude. It's about the path that took me here. And I hope that this service gives all of us the opportunity to feel and think the things that we need to today, be they confession or gratitude or something else. So come, Let us worship together. Our opening song is number 6 in our great hymnal, Just as Long as I Had Breath. I invite you to rise in body or spirit.
My name is Liz Martin, and I am the Director of Religious Exploration here at South Valley. And I add my good morning and welcome to you. Just as last Sunday, we started off our church year together by gathering the waters of our entire community. Today, we gather the streams of our younger community members and a few extra special older members. Wait, I mean slightly less young members. And direct them together into pools of learning communities downstairs. I like to think of this procession, because I'm a visual learner, as actual waters pouring down this steep stairway and flooding the basement with all of the love and laughter and learning that happens when we are together downstairs. And not to beat the whole water metaphor to death, but I've also been thinking of this year as a river run. Now, I've never actually been on a river run, so forgive me if I have this all wrong. But at first, I was picturing a river this year that was going to be tumultuous and full of rocks, and I was going to be in a hard kayak and I was going to need to invest in a very serious helmet. But now, I am picturing a much smoother ride. Partly because I have great new partners to stick their oars in and help guide our RE journey this year. I'd like to introduce all of you to Margaret Saito. Margot Saito, will you come up, Margaret? Margaret Saito is joining me on our RE team as our very part-time paid youth coordinator. You'll get more of an introduction this week in your email and your Facebook feeds, but I'm going to tell you one thing right now. This is a person with whom I'm willing to share. I don't share very well. The people that I consider the VIPs and the most fun people in this building, and that would be our teenagers. And I believe that Margot's personal experience with encountering UUism and becoming a UU as a teenager a few years ago, just a couple, will enrich and support their learning community beyond measure. I am so glad you are here. Stick around. You're good. Just a minute. Okay. So now, let us as a whole congregation covenant with those who devote their time and talents to faith formation in our Sunday program for children and youth today. We'll start with Reverend Bob. Do you, Reverend Bob, as our minister, pledge your support and energy as we embark on this new year of learning together with an open mind, a loving heart, and helping hands?
I do.
I didn't even have to tell him to say I do.
My turn now. Do you, Liz, as our Director of Religious Exploration, accept the responsibility of planning and supporting opportunities for religious exploration and faith formation for our church community, and commit to careful listening to our teachers, our children, and our entire community with an open mind, loving heart, and willing hands? If you accept this charge, please say, I do. Take your time.
You know I'm in. I do. Okay. Margaret, do you, Margot? Margot? Either one. Margot, as our youth coordinator, do you embark on this new year of learning together with an open mind, loving heart, and willing hands? If you accept this charge, please say, I do. I would now like to invite all of the adults who have agreed to work in our classrooms downstairs to please come forward to the stand.
Come forward to the front. Beautiful. Do you, the Sunday Religious Exploration facilitators, accept the responsibilities of being in the classrooms with our children and promise to bring your enthusiasm, talents, and energies to helping them grow into the individuals that they will become, with open minds, loving hearts, and willing hands, all while having fun? If you accept this charge, please say, we do. If you accept this charge, please say, we do. We do.
I'd now like to call the children and youth from these classes to please come forward. Let's start with the high schoolers. High schoolers, come stand right up here behind your facilitators. Excellent.
There's stairs over here. Or don't use the stairs.
I don't need stairs.
We don't need stairs.
All right, junior high. Anyone in our junior high middle school class? Come on in. Stand behind your teachers. You're fine. Excellent. Okay, seekers. 4th and 5th graders. Come on up. And you can stand in front of or behind your teachers. I think probably in front of. How about in front of? In front of your teachers. Thank you. Okay. Trailblazers. 2nd graders, come on up. There they are. There it is, right there. Fine Jill. Excellent, excellent. Okay. Pathfinders, kindergarten, first graders, will you come on up, Brooklyn? Teacher right here. Okay, and then any preschoolers out there in our butterflies class, do you want to come up here and join us too? Excellent. Okay, come stand right here with Tessa. Here you go, turn around. Oh, God. Join your friends. Excellent. Okay.
Okay, do you, the children and youth of our community, accept the responsibilities of being in classroom communities based on mutual respect and promise to bring your enthusiasm, talents, and energies on Sunday morning with open minds, loving hearts, and willing hands, all while having fun? If you accept this charge, please say, "We do!"
Before we take our students downstairs, I would like you to draw your attention to our banner where I asked everyone in this community to make their mark. If you didn't get a chance to make your mark before the service, it'll be over there after the service.
We still have a little covenanting left too.
Oh, we do? I jumped right in, sorry.
That's okay. I invite the entire congregation to rise in body or spirit. Let's complete this covenant.
Yeah.
Do you, the members and friends of South Valley, as a congregation, accept the responsibility of being a part of this learning community as teachers, as mentors, participants, and supporters, with open minds, loving hearts, and willing hands? And, of course, all while having fun. If you accept this charge, please say, "We do."
We do!
Blessed be.
And now we will sing all of this big party downstairs.
That was really beautiful. This morning we're going to combine our responsive reading, or make our responsive reading into a meditation. So I invite you to open to responsive reading number 637 in our gray hymnal. We're going to slow this responsive reading down to make it an opportunity for reflection. We're going to take pauses between each couplet. So I'll read the parts in regular font, respond with the parts in italics. The Litany of Atonement by UU Minister Reverend Rob Ellerisons. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other
each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin and end in love.
For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin and end in love.
For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin and end in love.
For losing sight of our unity.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin and end in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. Blessed be. I invite you now into a time of meditation and prayer, however we may pray and whoever we may pray to. We give thanks for this gathered community. May we find consolation in community and guidance and inspiration within these walls. We remember the people enduring Hurricane Florence and pray for their safety. May the path to recovery be smooth and merciful. We give thanks for the first responders. May their strength be bolstered by the support of the nation. And we lift up all those affected by the wildfires and the quality of air. May they find comfort and healing. We lift up all those struggling with illness, be it physical or mental, emotional or spiritual. May they too find comfort and healing. And we lift up all those who care for the sick, either as a vocation or in their own homes or neighborhoods. May they know that by their efforts they bring love into the world. We lift up those who struggle for financial security and those who struggle to find work. May they know that they have a value that transcends dollars and cents. And may the hungry find nourishment. We lift up all those in prison, be they the prisons of our system of mass incarceration, or prisons of shame, or addiction. May all the prisoners find their way to justice and freedom. We give thanks for the troublemakers, the advocates and organizers who put themselves on the line for the most vulnerable among us. May they find support and success. And may the day come soon when it can truly be said that Black lives matter. We lift up this country. May we put aside our unholy religion of guns. And may we find a collective imagination to create a future inspired by love. We pray for this blessed community. May the work of this UU community be healthy in process and fruitful in outcome. We remember the ways that we did not live up to our best selves, and we vow to begin again in love. For these spoken prayers and the unspoken prayers that we hold in our hearts, we summon our highest intentions and best energy. May they be so. And may we all be held in the heart of love. Blessed be. It is our practice here in South Valley to split our worship service offerings with a charitable organization or program that aligns with our principles and values. For September and October, we'll be donating to the American Nepali Students and Women's Educational Relief, ANSWER, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, non-religious organization that currently is empowering over 600 low-caste children and youth by providing them 12 to 15 years of education, all the way through college, with careful academic and career counseling. Will you join me in saying the words printed in the order of service for our offering? We are this church. We are its hands, its heart, its voice. Together, we share the wealth of this community and sustain it with our gifts. blessings on these gifts and these givers. Good morning again. It's so good to see you. So, as many of you know, I was invited to serve as the interim minister very late in the hiring season. And the process was severely shortened. So it was just an interview and some exchange of documents. I think it worked out okay, don't you? Don't answer that. All right. But because of this very accelerated process, a lot of folks didn't get much information about who their new minister is. So some folks here have probably been around for the search process for a settled minister. And that process is pretty thorough in making sure that the church and the called minister really have a good sense of each other. But for me, I think it's fair to say that for a lot of folks in the room, I am just a friendly stranger. So I thought I'd ask for your indulgence today and spend a little time talking about who I am. And I don't want to tell my whole story, that would be boring and awful. But I do want to share 3 stories that explain some of my formation as a Unitarian Universalist minister. So hopefully you'll know me a little better after this is over, and I hope that these stories maybe offer a little wisdom to take away. So first, a very quick general overview of my spiritual path. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, in a very Catholic family. My uncle was a priest. I got baptized and confirmed and went to church every Sunday until high school, when I began to have problems with the Catholics for all the usual reasons, blah, 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 sexism and homophobia, blah, blah, blah. So I was a little adrift, and because I was big into martial arts in college, I started to meditate. And I eventually began spending time at a Zen Buddhist monastery in the Catskills. Those are mountains outside of New York City. And I'll talk more about that later. That's one of my stories. Eventually, I was living in Boston and I stumbled into a Unitarian Universalist church. No idea what I was getting into. And I discovered 2 things. 1, these folks are really nice. And 2, this theology is awesome. So I stayed, I served on the board, I ran the pledge drive, and I started to think about ministry. So I'm going to stop there and tell a few specific stories. So first, let's go back to the Zen Buddhist monastery. I was doing a week-long sitting meditation there. And it was winter in the mountains, and the snow, and the clouds, and the cold contributed to a general sense of Zen austerity. So, I don't know if you know anything about Zen, but the color palette in this monastery runs the gamut from black to gray. But I loved the meditation, and I loved the kind of groove I could get in when I was sitting several times a day for several days in a row. At the end of the week, the participants of the week-long sit get to have an interview with the abbot, who at the time was the late, great John Dido-Lori. He was a lovely man. Totally unpretentious during the week, really accessible. You could always find him smoking a cigarette after a meal outside. That's the kind of guy. He was really down to earth. But for the interview, this moment, it was high formality. We had to wait silently in line to get our 10 minutes with the big guy. When I was finally shown into the interview room by the second in command, I found the abbot kneeling on a cushion in full abbot regalia. He was normally in jeans and a t-shirt. He had this elaborate robe, he had an extremely weird hat, and a look on his face that conveyed his full authority. And at his side was a handbell that he would use to begin and end the interview. So he rang that bell. And the interview opens with the ritual of bows and statements of commitment and intention. So, Finally, after a week of sitting in silent meditation, I got to ask the abbot a question. And so I told him about how I was so tormented by indecision about what to do with my life. I wasn't satisfied with where I was, but sometimes some paths look good and then others look good. And I consider another thing. Should I go to cooking school? Should I go back to managing a homeless shelter? Can I live overseas? I explained to the abbot that I just couldn't get to a decision. Could he help me with that? And the abbot paused, and he gave me a compassionate look. And then he said, the decision takes only a moment to make. Everything else that you're doing, that's not making a decision. That's something else. Well, for a moment, I was kind of stunned. The decision only takes a moment. Holy cow. And then I started to ask like a dozen follow-up questions that like leapt to mind. But as the first question left my mouth, he snatched his bell and rang it. End of interview. So it took me a little time to understand what the abbot meant. But I came to believe that he was telling me that I shouldn't confuse making a decision with the process of discernment. He was telling me to chill out. He didn't give me the easy answer that I wanted. I really wanted him to just tell me, what to do. That would have been nice. But he did give me some good advice about making life choices. And the lesson for me was, don't confuse a lack of clarity about the future with a lack of ambition or direction. Don't get anxious about having a lack of clarity. It's okay to not know. Not knowing is normal. And that's been a great comfort to me as I get older. This church is in a place of not knowing, and that's okay. The decision about the next minister will be made in a moment. Until then, maybe we can enjoy the process of discernment. Here's another story, and I'll warn you, it's sad. My mom died of brain tumors in 2001. Her decline was slow for a few years, then very fast. The whole process felt like it lasted forever, and it just ground me down to a wisp. I was living in Boston during her final year. I was working for an internet service provider. It was the glory days of the internet. I was making the most money I had ever made and still have ever made in my life, and I was absolutely hating it. I was really close to my mom, and it was really painful to watch her decline, and I just did not have the resilience to deal with it. And so I dealt with it in a terrible, predictable way. I numbed myself. I drank, I smoked. My girlfriend at the time would give me her painkillers, which I found went particularly well with red wine. And I just suffered inside that tortoise shell of intoxication. Didn't help. One day, late in the process, I got back to Boston after visiting my mother in the ICU in Buffalo, and I wondered if I would ever see her again. It was close to the end. And my girlfriend, then girlfriend, to whom I owe an enormous debt, had bought tickets to see Ram Dass screen his new documentary and speak a little. So Ram Dass is a person from the United States who went to India in the 60s, and he was actually a psychology professor at Harvard. He had his perspective radically changed by his experiences there. He changed his name. I think his original name was Bruce. He came back, seriously, he came back and wrote a great book called Be Here Now, and he committed himself to teaching mindfulness practices, and he was and is enormously influential. The documentary was called Fierce Grace, and it was about people coming to terms with enormous losses in their life. And it wasn't painful for me to watch. It was cathartic. Watching these regular folks grapple with loss touched me inside. and I wept hard through the whole movie. I can only imagine what the people around me were thinking, like, what's up with this big hairy guy who's weeping? And I just want to take a moment here to make a suggestion to the folks who identify as male in the room. Guys, I highly recommend weeping in public. I mean it. If the urge comes, let it rip. It's so great. It's healthy for you, and it sends the great message to other men that weeping is sometimes okay. So let it go, man. Have a good cry. You'll be better for it. Okay, my public service announcement is over. After the screening, Ram Dass came out on stage, and he had suffered a stroke in the last year, and he used a wheelchair, and he struggled to speak. He suffered from aphasia, just like my mother did, and it was brutal to watch him. After he spoke, there was a VIP reception, which my girlfriend had sprung for, and folks were lining up to have a word with Ram Dass. I, of course, headed for the free champagne. Well, when the line died down, I figured I'd get my girlfriend's money worth and go talk to the guy. And I knelt down beside Ram Dass's chair, and I explained how I had just come from seeing my mother in the ICU, and how painful it was. I'm pretty suspicious of famous people, especially famous gurus, but in that moment, Ram Dass was 100% focused on me, and I could feel the waves of authentic compassion coming off of him. And that flustered me. He said, "Your mom is dying. What are you getting out of the experience?" Well, that question shocked me. I said, "What am I getting out of the experience? I'm getting my ass kicked. That's what I'm getting out of the experience." And he was so patient. He patiently and lovingly said back to me, "Yes, you're getting your ass kicked. But how are you growing? What are you learning? How are you growing? What are you learning?" I had no idea what to say. I just mumbled something back to him, and I thanked him, and I walked away. But over the next couple days, something moved in me. I began to see this experience didn't have to be pure suffering that I alternatively either ignored or endured. I realized that what was going on was a sacred, important time in my human experience. That the pain would still be there, but I could also grow from this. And the way I dealt with my mom's dying changed profoundly. I slowed way down in the drinking. I stopped isolating myself from my family, and I let myself grieve. It made all the difference. Now, I don't want to tell folks that there's always something to be gained from a hard time in one's life. I don't want to minimize the pain that folks feel from a loss. That's real. And there are some things that we can never make right. But I do offer the possibility that maybe in some situations there's an avenue towards growth, towards being the best person that we can be. And I keep that in mind as I go down life's path. This church has suffered losses. They lost their music director and their minister. It's good to grieve, and perhaps within this there's an avenue towards growth as well. I got one more story. It's about how I decided to go to seminary. So in the summer of 2012, with very short notice, just a couple of weeks, I was offered the chance to go to Afghanistan as a civilian contractor. And I was between jobs, my marriage was on the rocks, and it seemed like something to do. I told my then wife I would only go if she agreed. We both knew that we were struggling. We did a ton of therapy. I love therapy. We both knew that we were struggling, and she said yes. And she said maybe it would help clarify what we should do about our marriage. And she was absolutely right. It clarified that we should not be married. But that's another story. And she actually is still one of my very best friends. Anyway, I went. So every little military base over there has X-ray scanners at the gates to check people and vehicles for bombs. And my job was installing and maintaining these scanners. Understatement of the year, it was kind of intense. People get very anxious when their bomb scanner gets broken. So I'd get the call, I'd grab my tool bag, maybe a backpack, a change of clothes, get on a helicopter or in a convoy, and go to that base and fix the machine. Life on these US bases was mostly horrible. They're just really unbelievably ugly, and there's constant rocket attacks, and it's really boring. It's really weird to say, we're getting attacked, it's so boring. But it is. After 4 months in Kabul up north, I was transferred down south to Kandahar to manage the southern half of the country for the company. And the first couple of days I was walking around Kandahar and trying to figure the place out. I was always lost. And out of the blue, there was a bulletin board, and I saw a flyer on it, and it had a UU chalice on the flyer. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I looked closely, and it was advertising a weekly Unitarian Universalist worship service. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I mean, this flyer even had a rainbow on it. I mean, our people. It was the first rainbow I saw in Kandahar in all of Afghanistan. So it turns out that the one Army Unitarian Universalist chaplain in Afghanistan was on this base, a guy, Reverend First Lieutenant Chris Antal. He's now a chaplain at the VA in Philadelphia. And he actually gave the sermon at my ordination, which was very cool. So I had been a Unitarian Universalist since the early 90s. And of course, I went to the services. I mean, this was huge. And I learned something that hadn't occurred to me before. So the other places where I had practiced Unitarian Universalism were mostly Boston and Washington, D.C. And these are places where the culture and values out in the street are very close to the culture and values in the sanctuary. I mean, there are places that are inside the NPR bubble, so to speak. So it was really easy for me to take Unitarian Universalism for granted. It's like, yeah, what's the big deal? But now, in Kandahar, I was in a place where most people around me emphatically did not share our UU values. And the feeling of that little congregation as an oasis, as the one place where I felt like I could be my whole self, that made me love our faith so much. And I came to understand the value of our congregations in places like Tampa Bay and Montgomery, Alabama, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and yes, Salt Lake City. Well, anyway, on Veterans Day 2012, Chaplain Antal gave a sermon about how America loves war but treats its veterans terribly. And everyone in the room, which was a mix of veterans like myself and active duty people actually wearing guns and in uniform, they were all like, yeah, that's our experience. But his higher-ups, who had a problem with him because he had been unstinting in his support of career troops, they sent him home for that sermon. There's no freedom of a pulpit in a war zone, apparently. But before they sent him home, he took me aside and he asked me to be the lay leader of our little congregation. And I was like, dude, do you have any idea what a terrible person I am? And I just kind of said no. And he said, yes. He said, you are doing it. And when your chaplain in Afghanistan says, you are doing it, you're doing it. So I did it, and I was terrible at it. Oh man, I mean, I gotta feel terrible for those folks who endured those horrible sermons and the fumbled rituals and all of it. But I have to admit, I loved it, and I applied to seminary while I was still in Afghanistan. And 2 months after I got back, I was in Chicago at Meadville Lombard Theological School, on my way. But I never forgot how that little plywood shack congregation in Kandahar made me feel safe. Just like this church makes people feel safe. Let's always remember that this church saves lives. We save lives in this work. We offer sanctuary. And let's take that seriously. I'm going to stop there. We are our stories. We really are our stories. And I have more stories to tell, and I want to hear your stories too. My prayer for us is that we can tell our collective stories and the story of this church, and that we can use these stories to imagine our way to a future that celebrates and shares and builds our Unitarian Universalist values. May it be so. I invite you now to join in our closing song, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place, number 1008 in the teal hymnal, Rise in Body or Spirit. Join me as we extinguish our chalice. Extinguish this chalice. And I want to say, let's use our stories to imagine our way to a future that celebrates and shares and grows our Unitarian Universalist values. Our worship is over. Our service begins. Go in peace, gentle people. Don't forget, we're meeting outside. Group picture.